because this changes everything, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. The question of what is really happening with XRP right now is sending quiet shockwaves through institutions while retail is being deliberately distracted. This is not hype, and it is definitely not something you will hear on mainstream cryptocurrency YouTube. Right now, as you're watching this, Ripple is moving in ways that don't make headlines but absolutely move markets. And the timing of this so-called major XRP update is not random, it's coordinated, it's strategic, and it lines up far too perfectly with what the SEC, BlackRock, the IMF, and even central banks have been quietly restructuring behind closed doors. And if you think that sounds insane, good, because that's exactly how real paradigm shifts feel before they become obvious. Ripple is sitting at the adult table having conversations about liquidity corridors, tokenized assets, and cross-border settlement at a scale that would make Swift look like dial-up internet. This is happening while the media is screaming about meme coins and distractions. XRP is once again being positioned as infrastructure, which means that it is not a coin or a pump, but rather plumbing for a financial system that is clearly breaking down in front of our very eyes. Ask yourself this extreme question. Why does XRP always resurface right before major macro shifts, regulatory pivots, or banking stress events, coincidence or coordination? Because when BlackRock starts talking about tokenization, when the International Monetary Fund starts pushing global liquidity frameworks, and when the Securities and Exchange Commission suddenly goes quiet instead of loud, that is not bullish noise. That is ominous silence before deployment. And before we go any further, I want to remind you to hit the like button and subscribe right now. What is going to come next is not just information, it is protection against being taken by surprise. I can assure you that this video will age exceptionally well for those who pay attention to it at an early stage. The reason this update matters so much is because XRP is no longer fighting for survival, it's waiting for activation. And that's a terrifying thought for anyone who sold the bottom, laughed at Ripple holders, or believed the narrative that XRP was finished, because the data, the connections, and the timing are starting to align in a way that screams insider preparation rather than retail speculation. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why some people are quietly accumulating while others will be forced to chase later at prices they never imagined. Honored viewers, now that you have your attention, let's move on to the part that the loud critics never want to touch, which is the data and the authority behind this XRP update. This is because narratives fall apart when numbers, documents, and institutional behavior begin telling a different story. And at this very moment, that story is screaming accumulation and preparation. Look at what Ripple has been doing while the market is sleeping, expanding RippleNet corridors, deepening on-demand liquidity usage, and quietly positioning XRP as a neutral bridge asset. This is exactly what the BIS, IMF, and World Economic Forum have repeatedly outlined in their white papers. No, they don't name XRP directly every time, but the framework fits XRP like a glove. Instant settlement, low cost, regulatory traceability, and scalability under stress are all characteristics that XRP possesses. Ask yourself which asset actually satisfies all of these requirements at the same time, because Bitcoin does not, Ethereum does not, and stablecoins introduce counterparty risk that regulators despise. This is not a random soundbite. Rather, it is a signal, and Ripple has already created the rails that make that future operational today, not in 5 years from now. When BlackRock's Larry Fink openly talks about tokenization being the next evolution of markets and argues that settlement must become instantaneous, this is not a random soundbite. When you consider Ripple's advisory board connections, former central bankers, former regulators, and other individuals who do not risk their reputations on vaporware, the authority layer becomes even more substantial. At the same time, the narrative of the SEC lawsuit has quietly shifted from an existential threat to a procedural cleanup. This is the reason why fear campaigns have become louder rather than quieter. This is because when real risk is eliminated, the only weapon that remains is psychological warfare against retail. And let's talk about XRP supply for a second, because this is where the math becomes uncomfortable. Escrow releases are predictable, transparent, and already priced in, yet liquidity demand from corridors, tokenized real-world assets, and institutional settlement does not care about your feelings. It cares about throughput, and when throughput rises faster than available liquid supply, price becomes a function of utility, not hype. This is basic economics that even the IMF acknowledges in its liquidity modeling. Why would global banks continue testing and integrating XRP if it were truly irrelevant? More importantly, why would Ripple continue to win partnerships in regions that actually move money rather than just tweeting about it? Furthermore, why would regulatory bodies around the world be creating frameworks that XRP fits almost perfectly into while other projects scramble to adapt? The answer to this question will tell you exactly why this major XRP update is more important than any short-term price candle. Do you really believe that trillions of dollars in cross-border flows are going to run on chains that are crowded, gas fees that are volatile, and settlements that are unpredictable? Or will they choose something that has been tested in the battlefield, is compliant, and is already embedded in the financial infrastructure? Respected insiders, this is the point at which the pressure point is formed, the catalyst layer paired with the FUD defense. This is due to the fact that every important move in XRP history has been preceded by maximum confusion, maximum doubt, and greatest psychological tiredness. And at this present moment, that pattern is repeating itself nearly precisely. Ripple is sitting in the middle with a live, scalable solution that regulators already understand, and this convergence is why the fear, uncertainty, and doubt FUD has become more aggressive, more desperate, and frankly more absurd. The catalyst that everyone is missing is not a single announcement or tweet. Rather, it is convergence. Regulatory clarity inching forward globally, while liquidity crises quietly expand, banks choking on legacy systems while tokenization accelerates, and Ripple. You will hear the same recycled nonsense, that XRP is centralized, that Ripple dumps on holders, and that banks will never use a volatile asset, and every single one of those arguments will collapse under basic scrutiny. This is due to the fact that decentralization without adoption is pointless, that escrow transparency is higher than almost any project in crypto, and that volatility decreases as liquidity and utility increase. The SEC has acknowledged this phenomenon in other asset frameworks, even if they won't say XRP's name out loud. When institutions position themselves early, they want retail to be discouraged rather than enthused. Therefore, you should ask yourself why the FUD tends to surge right before potential triggers such as debates about exchange-traded funds, ETFs, tokenized bond pilots, or central bank settlement trials. This might be a coincidence or a concerted narrative control. What happens when just a fraction of the volume of cross-border settlement, remittances, or tokenized securities touches XRP liquidity pools is the real catalyst that nobody wants to talk about. This is because at that moment, the price is no longer a chart pattern. It is a bottleneck, and bottlenecks do not remain inexpensive. Rather, they explode until equilibrium is restored. For this reason, mainstream media either chooses to ignore XRP or portrays it as contentious. This is due to the fact that providing an honest explanation of it would compel difficult questions regarding the reasons behind why a 10-year-old asset continues to survive, integrate, and resurface stronger after each effort at burial. When you realize that the same voices that are screaming "scam" today will call it obvious tomorrow, just like they did with Amazon, Bitcoin, and every other asset that transitioned from ridicule to infrastructure, you should mentally prepare yourself for shock. If you feel the tension rising around XRP right now, that is because catalysts do not announce themselves politely. Rather, they pressure test conviction until only informed holders remain. This is the part that makes people uncomfortable. The price explanation and the ultimate warning, because if you remove away emotion, tribalism, and fear, you are left with stark math and ruthless reality. Respected holders, this is the part that makes people uncomfortable. At its current price, XRP makes sense only if you assume that it will never be used at scale, that it will never touch institutional liquidity, and that it will never become a part of the tokenized financial system that BlackRock, the International Monetary Fund, and central banks are openly preparing for. This assumption is becoming more difficult to defend with each passing day. In the event that XRP is able to facilitate even a small percentage of global cross-border payments, derivatives settlement, or tokenized asset transfers, the required liquidity per token will significantly increase. This is not due to speculation, but rather to velocity constraints, slippage control, and risk management requirements imposed by institutions that deal in billions of dollars rather than memes. This is where the extreme price discussions come from. Not hopium numbers pulled from thin air, but models that account for daily settlement volume, corridor depth, and the reality that liquidity prefers fewer, deeper pools. And when critics laugh at higher XRP valuations, they conveniently ignore how small the float actually becomes when utility locks up supply in real-world use. One last word of caution. This is not a get-rich-quick play, and anyone who claims to be selling it as such is lying. This is a positioning play, and positioning plays punish impatience while rewarding those who understand cycles. This is because when activation occurs, it is quick, violent, and unforgiving, leaving no time for second guesses or perfect entries. You are underexposed because you believe the noise, the sarcasm, and the continuous doom thumbnails, and history is cruel to individuals who mix comfort with correctness. The most significant danger is not that XRP will go to zero. Rather, it is that XRP will perform exactly as designed while you are underexposed. If this major XRP update feels heavier than normal, that is because it is. Once clarity is made available to the public, the asymmetric opportunity will be lost forever, and it will be replaced by hindsight and sorrow. As we come to a close on this, it is important that you, esteemed investors, have a clear understanding of the fact that moments such as these are never loud, never obvious, and never easy. Instead, they are quiet, tense, and filled with doubt because this is the way that genuine differences take place before they become history. XRP does not require your belief, your tweets, or your feelings. Rather, it requires usage. The unsettling reality is that usage is creeping in through corridors, pilots, tokenization frameworks, and regulatory structures, while the population is so preoccupied with arguing about narratives that are no longer relevant. The silence in places where there were assaults in the past, the institutional language, the regulatory stance, the slow but purposeful build-out that doesn't worry about daily candles, and the fact that the signs were overlooked when the clues were everywhere will be questions that people will ask in the years to come. This has never been about hype cycles. Rather, it has been about determining if a digital asset could last for a sufficient amount of time, be compatible with the necessary standards, and be scalable enough to be trusted with real value on a global scale. XRP continues to pass tests that were designed to make it fail. This is the final extreme question. When the switch flips and liquidity flows where it has been discreetly prepared, will you be positioned or will you be witnessing incredulity transform into regret in real time? This is because markets do not wait for consensus. Rather, they reward foresight and punish denial. It is important to maintain a keen mind, to be wary of any noise that may be there, and to keep in mind that the most perilous times in the market are those in which nothing appears to be occurring. This is because this is typically the time when everything is being set up behind the scenes.